I'm going to talk today about housing as a business. And we've been looking across the country and looking at what's happening in different First Nations. And it's housing as a business, or the using housing as an economic driver, is not new. It's happening across the country. It's happening in different ways at different levels. And what I want to do today is give you a few of these examples and relate the housing to economic development opportunities. So what I'll do is walk you through a slide presentation. That should take 30 or 40 minutes, and then I will visit the website that we've created. And anytime during the presentation, please ask questions, offer comments, whatever you feel like. You know, this is open, this is information for you. I want to try and make sure I get the information across in a clear way. So if you're not understanding or have a question, please by all means stop me and ask the question. I found this saying when I was looking through one of my books. I thought it was quite provocative. Take from it what you will. I think it's a nice saying. Homes and your house is extremely important. So, with that, I'll move right into the presentation. Housing as a business. I'll talk a little bit more about our home team a little bit later. We've set up an advisory group to work with what we are doing here. And we're talking about a community-based entity. A little bit about myself. My name is Ken Jacobs. I'm from Curve Lake First Nation. That's South Central Ontario. An average-sized community. We have membership just under 2,000. We have about 900 living on reserve. I was manager of that community back in the 80s. And I was fresh out of college, fresh out of studying business and how to do business, all of that good stuff. And, so I did implement some of what we'll be talking about. I was able to implement some of that at Curve Lake, and it's been in place for the last, well, it's 30 years now. And we, in fact, do not have a housing list, a housing waiting list. Private home ownership on Curve Lake is standard, and it's practiced. You know, so it does work. It does take a while to implement and put in place, but we're going to need houses forever, so we've got lots of time. With that, I'll move into the presentation. There's 5 objectives of the presentation today. Now I want to look first of all at the connection to economic development. We talk about working together, working horizontally, and so on, all these fancy words. But what I want to do is bring the economic development aspects into the housing opportunities. When you create business, you look at demand. That's one of the key features of setting up a demand. So I'm going to talk about how many houses do we need out there across the country. What is the actual demand? Then we'll look at a plan to build more houses. Planning, of course, is all important. Long-term planning, medium-term planning, short-term planning. It all comes into play. There's a 4-phased approach I want to talk about, and it works. So I'll explain that in a little more detail. And then I want to look at what you need to have in place to make your business a success. What are the components? What is a business? Very simply stated, it's production of goods or services for a profit. So you have a buyer, seller, goods, service, you exchange, and somebody walks away with a profit. Any questions so far? Any comments? Good. What do you need for a business? You need a seller that's hopefully honest, well-established, and reputable. You also need a buyer that's ready to buy your product or service, willing to buy it, and able to buy it. You must have the purchasing power. You need a product that has good quality. There must be a demand for that product, and it should be at a fair price. And what we're talking about today is a house. And in this case, your seller will be the business that you establish, and the buyer will be the individual members. What are the characteristics of a successful business? Well, they need to be profitable. They need to be self-sustaining. There has to be job creation. There has to be the opportunity for skill development. When you're building houses, you have a number of skills that are required there. You need the roofers, you need the electricians, the plumbers, the cement people, you need all of those. Another characteristic for a successful business is you need a growing market, and that's absolutely true with housing. You know, the need, the backlog is increasing. You need different revenue sources. You need money to pay for the product. We'll talk a little bit about that. This is a business term. You need debt-to-equity ratios. You need to be able to operate your business successfully. You need proper cash flow. I'll get into a little more detail about where some of the money might come from when you're talking about housing. Financing, that's one of the main areas. Mortgages, banks are ready, willing, and able to provide mortgage money for housing. There are other sources as well. There's materials, the infrastructure cost. There's also some assistance from various governments that can provide revenue to help there as well. There's the construction, maintenance around the housing, housing inspections, house furnishings, repairs, and all sorts of other areas. I'm sure you can think of others yourself as well. Now, I picked $200,000 as an average cost for a house. Now, I know that's not real, it's an average. There are houses being constructed in the south for $150,000. I know the housing in the north costs quite a bit more than that, but for illustration purposes, I've picked $200,000. And here I've got three columns. We're going to look at some of the revenue sources or some of the elements of housing, and then look at the money involved for one house, and then the money involved for 10 houses. On the finance with interest, if you pay a mortgage, it's just amazing the amount of money that's paid out when you end up buying the house. But this also is a great business opportunity. And the calculation here is based on a 4% interest spread. And what that means is if it costs you nothing to get the money, if you get the money as a grant, then you could lend it out at 4%. If you had to borrow the money at 2%, then you'd have to put your mortgage out at 6%. So that's where that 4% spread is talking about. In this case, it's also talking about $20,000 coming from the home buyer or home builder. So you're talking about a mortgage of $180,000, running it over 25 years, and with the 4% interest, the amount that the bank or the First Nation, the amount you can earn with one house is $104,000 over that 25 years. So if you start building 10 houses a year, then you're looking at over $1 million. And this, we'll talk about a few places during the presentation. There are communities that have set up revolving loan funds. You know, they've taken own source revenue of some sort, including RAMA funds, you know, the casino. If you're able to take some of that, put that money out to your individual community members as a loan or a mortgage, then both people benefit. You know, it helps everyone. And that's a similar situation as well with your minor capital allocation for housing. It comes into your community as a grant for the entire community. And if you want to keep that as an asset, the best way to do that is to set it up in your books as a mortgage. Lend it out to your individual community member. They pay it back to the First Nation. You know, that money then becomes a revolving fund that benefits into future generations. That money will stay on your books as an asset that improves your financial situation and status as a community, and that will also benefit your individual First Nation member. It's quite a key. It's working very well in a number of communities. I've got a slide later that lists a few of those communities. The labor component. The accepted or standard cost in building a house is half of the cost of that house is labor. Of course, if you build two or three houses, you can't really hire an individual that's a carpenter, electrician, plumber, all of those elements. But once you start building 10 houses a year, and once you realize that, you know, half of that, or $500,000 is there for labor, then you can start thinking about, well, maybe we can hire a carpenter, maybe a few framers, you know, and so on and so on. Plumbers, electricians. Keep the money in your community. Too often the money for housing is being expensed and the benefit going off the community. And similarly with materials, these percentages are taken from standards in the building construction. They say 37 to 45% of the cost of a house is for materials. So building supplies, you know, there's an opportunity for a business there. Standard profit is about 10%. Professional fees, you need your architects, you need your lawyers, you need consultants. Unfortunately, you need those as well. So that's some of the money you're talking about. When you know, just a few of the elements, the opportunities for business there. There's the money generated or available with one house, and then if you start building 10 houses. And there's, you know, the relation to economic development. And then here, there's other opportunities for business as well. If you're building 2 or 3 houses, it isn't quite as apparent, but once you start building 10, 15 houses a year, Our community has close to 300 housing units, and there are opportunities with landscaping, snow removal, renovations, building decks, all of these other opportunities. And of course, it'll depend on the numbers that we end up building. I mentioned earlier the demand for housing. I'm going to a lot of numbers here, but the sources are actually from government. They're a little bit outdated. You'll notice on this slide here, I'm talking about the different regions, provinces in Canada, and the different numbers of First Nations. And this is from a while back, so it's not completely accurate. In Ontario, as an example, ANSI or INAC recognized 128 First Nations. The First Nation governments recognize 133 or 134. But for illustration purposes, these are where the numbers come from. In Canada, there's a little more than 600 First Nations. The Assembly of First Nations conducted a study back in 2005. They estimate that there's a backlog of 80,000 units in Canada. That works out to about 130 homes per First Nation. That's the backlog. And naturally, from the federal government side, from INAC or ANSI, the estimates from ANSI showed somewhere around 35,000 units. Of course, these are outdated. The other important factor is that demand with our young people growing up, moving out of the house at some point. I still have a 30-year-old at home, but they do eventually move out. They need homes of their own. And the estimate says it's somewhere between 2,000 and 4,500 per year. That's the demand that's growing into it. And my best guess of what's being built, that we're building about 3,000, maybe 3,200, 3,500 a year. So we're not catching up, we're losing ground. So we have to find different ways and means to work toward getting product. This is another study that was done. They're looking at about 96,000 units out there, but there are a number of them that need replacement and need major fixing. So that adds to the demand as well. So if we're looking at a fair, low estimate, 60,000 units for 600 communities, we say it costs about $200,000 per house. $12 billion, that's the backlog. That's the demand. That's $12,000 million. It's a lot of money. So, and it's a problem, it's an issue, but it's also an opportunity. So if you can look at that there's a demand out there. If we can figure out ways that we can help our members access mortgages, get additional capital into the community, then we can build more houses. The Ontario backlog, in general terms, Ontario represents about 20% of what happens across Canada. That's a rough figure, but 1/5 of the market. Again, it's $2.4 billion that's needed in Ontario. So the demand, and these are averages, it'll be different for your individual community. If you've got a housing list of 200, then you know your demand is $40 million. So if your community is smaller, your demand will be smaller. So some of the principles we have to look at if we're going to approach this in a business way, you have to maintain community decision making. You have to get your community on side. You have to ensure there's good quality and a fair price. We have to look after the needs-based. That'll always be there. The social housing is with every society. It's here in Thunder Bay. It's here. My urban center is Peterborough. Social housing is there as well. But the other part we'll be talking about here is affordability-based. If a family is gainfully employed, if they have income of $150,000, then we should be able to look at ways and means of helping that family get a mortgage and build a house of their choosing. Build a house that suits them. The legal title to land and home ownership must be clear. Standard ways of building a house, they're good, but we have to look at the other ways too. There's provincial government incentives. If you look at the green energy parts of things, there's grants available there as well. What are some of the realities, some of the assumptions? Well, I know my parents did not understand what a mortgage was. My parents, the house, I can remember living in 2 different houses. Both of them were put up with cash. That's just the way housing was built up until at least 1970. Housing on reserve, sometimes viewed as a political or a social right. And that's good, we can respect that. This housing as a business is an alternative. I pointed out the backlog is somewhere around $15 to $20 billion. That's what the backlog is. This is an opportunity or a way of addressing some of that need. The banks, other financial institutions are anxious to help with mortgage money. But it's all money that has to be paid back, or most of it is money that has to be paid back. The demand is going to keep growing. We've also got the people that have moved away, the people that have moved away to college, university. They've graduated, they've set up home in other urban centers. It would be great if we could create employment and bring some of those people back home as well. Now the other demographic that we realize are the baby boomers. There are a number of people that I got my first OAS check in November, so there's a number of baby boomers that have been out working. They have good pensions. They want to move home. They want to be able to come home to a nice house, or at a minimum, it'd be nice to help them build a cottage or a summer home. So that again, another great business opportunity. So again, the untapped market of the gainfully employed, typical situation at our community, we have 100 people on the waiting list. We were building 3 or 4 houses. It's only natural that the allocation, the chief and council, they allocate and provide that house to the most needy. It's the family with 4 or 5 kids. It's the family that's living in rough conditions. And it's quite often the family that's not working. So it ends up the 5, 10, or 15 at the other end of the spectrum, the ones that can afford a mortgage, they're not able to access it. So that's what we're talking about here. It's gainfully employed. They are members as well.
I was just wondering, this morning the Grand Chief mentioned about charging members of the reserve rent. Would people that are gainfully employed or have more money kind of fall into that? People who have low income can fall into that, and how do you make that fair for them both?
Good question. The way you would make that fair for them both is you would set up a rental regime where a fair amount of rent was calculated. And let's think about it as 3 different levels. So you have the members that require help. Well, we'd have to continue to find ways to help them. So we'd have to find ways to subsidize their rent. Okay? Now you have the others that are beyond that stage. They have some income. They're moving up in the gainfully employed type of situation. So those individuals could continue to rent. They could move into starter homes. Okay, so there's that demographic as well. So, and then the third would be the gainfully employed. You know, we have individuals in communities that are millionaires. There's a house down south that went up just recently put up. It's got a Golf Queen in the front of it. It cost $1.4 million to put up. But that's a house on reserve that was put up by the individual member. That's the extreme. But we also have a number of community members that are gainfully employed. They're making, between the husband and wife, they're making $100,000 to $200,000. They can afford a standard mortgage. So they could be assisted to access the mortgage, bring that capital into the community, and pay for that mortgage. So you've got all levels. But with this, you'd be getting away from the free housing. The rent would still be charged, but you would need a system in place, either from your Ontario Works or from the council, where housing would have to be subsidized. Thanks for the question. Existing policies, there's another situation in the south where councils do support this idea, but they have restrictions on the amount that they will co-sign. Some First Nations will co-sign up to $80,000 for an individual. Some will co-sign up to $200,000 for an individual. I just merely pointed that out. What needs to be in place to decide whether your community is ready? Some of the characteristics: you need reasonable employment levels. It's not going to work if all you have is your band office and your administration. There needs to be 50 or 60% of the community that are employed. There also has to be the willingness to take on debt, both from the community side of things, the business side of things, and from the individual side of things. There needs to be a lands department in place. You, of course, need the land. You need service land. There is the opportunity to apply to the federal government for water and septic systems and setting up subdivisions in that way. If you're not able to do that, then it's individual well and septic. You need the ability to tie the land to the individual. We talked about there is the land management system or the CP, certificate of possession. And the biggie, you have to have the willingness to separate the politics from the business. The 4 phases. In order to do this, planning has to be in place. You have to look at long-term planning, you have to look at medium-term and short-term. Now this, what I'm talking about here is the medium-term. You look at 4-phase approach, and these 4 phases, this as well is where the economic development programming from Aboriginal Affairs comes into play. We have a program that's called the Community Economic Opportunities Program. And if you make application to that program in economic development, there is money available to assist the community to examine this stage of the plan. So, first of the 4 phases, there needs to be some research and training. Second, you have to decide on the business model that will work for your community. You have to put that business model in place, put the resources together, and then you have to start building the houses. A little bit more on each one. In the research and training, what you have to do there is have a good look at your waiting list. Set up a database. What is the situation? How many people in the family? Are they working? What's the income? All of that. Look also at what types of houses do you need? How many 2-bedrooms? How many 3-bedroom houses? How many of the other different types do you need? You have to have information sessions with your community. You have to get your community on side. You have to talk about what you're going to put in place. You have to start developing policies, look at some of the best practices. We'll talk a little more about the home team later, but there are a number of individuals and communities that are ready, willing, and able to share their information. CMHC, one of our federal partners, very supportive of what we're doing. They have developed a number of videos, short videos that show what has happened in other communities across Canada. A good series of best practices. And share that with your community. Decide what's best for you. Then you have to decide on the business model that you're going to set up. Are you going to incorporate? How are you going to separate from the politics? How are you going to operate this business? There has to be agreement from chief and council. Third phase of that will be to decide on how many staff you're going to have in your housing business. Whether you're going to do your own construction, whether you're going to hire that in, and how you're going to deliver on that 5-year plan. You'll have to start negotiating with the different agencies. What help, what arrangements can you set up with the other federal governments, with CMHC, with Indian Affairs or Aboriginal Affairs, with the province as well? What agreements do you want in place? There's also some First Nation communities that are close to urban centers. They've set up agreements to share water, hook onto the water systems and so on. Phase 4 is the actual delivery of the housing. How are you going to sell the houses? How are you going to manage and operate the business? The next section is actually the components of that business and what are the major task areas. You'll need to look after some policy and program management, government relations. I'll talk a little more on each of these as well. You know, how do you look after your money? How do you look after the applicant inventory? How do you deal with the land issues? How do you control the quality of the housing and the inspections? How do you do your contracting and purchasing? And the policy and program management. How do you decide if a person is eligible for a mortgage? Banks have a way of doing that. How will your business do that? How do you select the people that will get the housing? Are you going to include special subsidies? You will continue to receive the minor capital allocation. You will continue to receive those as grants for the community. And it will be up to each individual First Nation to consider whether they want to pass some of that on as a grant or a subsidy. With Curve Lake, our community, any individual that builds a house will have the well and the septic cost covered by the First Nation. They also provide basic assistance to gain access to that property, to the land. So a culvert, if it's required, a couple of loads of gravel and so on. So those types of things, there's others in other communities, they've set up situations where if an individual pays regularly, pays on time, then in December they forgive all or part of that payment. So that's another way to help individuals. There are other communities that will forgive the last 5 or 10% of the mortgage if payments have been made on a regular basis. So there's different ways of doing that. I mentioned earlier the housing options, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, executive, basic, all of that stuff has to come into play. Landlord-Tenant Act equivalent, if there are problems, how do you deal with it? You have to have something in place there to protect the buyer. The big one, enforcement and collections, that's a toughie. I know in Curve Lake it was pretty rough for a while. There was a situation where there was a huge backlog in the payments, and we had to deal with that. One of the first policies we put in place was if staff or chief and council were behind in payments, it was automatically deducted from their pay. So that's the way we dealt with it there. I know there have been repossessions that have had to happen and so on in communities, but that's a reality. That's when you get into home ownership, that is a reality, and it's something you have to deal with. Government relations. You have an opportunity to work with another First Nation that's close to you. That has happened. There's companies that are set up for manufacturing windows in the First Nation. Well, arrange with other communities that you purchase from. How do you work with the federal departments? Provincial government as well. How do you involve the provincial government? There's opportunities there for training, for apprenticeship. All of those different elements will come into play. Neighboring municipalities, I know Nipissing is an example. They hooked into the water system from North Bay. So they've set up that type of agreement. There's also agreement in other communities on waste management. So. And also in your financial management, how do you deal with CMHC, the programming that they have available, how do you set that up? Community mortgage funds, revolving loans, are you going to get involved with that? Is your community going to participate in that? I mentioned earlier, you know, that's where the money is, that's where the biggest opportunity is. Are you going to get involved with guarantees with the banks? There are a number of communities down south especially that I'm aware of that it's set up just like a line of credit with a bank, and they approach the bank. The First Nation itself will have their credit worthiness determined, and it'll be decided, well, okay, we'll let you co-sign on $5 million of mortgages or $10 million or whatever. So that's what I'm talking about here. There's also client equity. You know, there are individuals that have savings that they can apply to buying provincial subsidies, the capital funds I had mentioned. Earl Commanda is here as well. I see he's on the agenda to talk about the First Nation Market Housing Fund. That's available as well, and other sources. Your business will also, I mentioned before, have detailed profiles of the housing that's in place. Just the different elements of operating business. You have to ensure that you're going to operate that business into the future. The different land issues, you know, whether it's community property you're dealing with, whether you operate with the CP, which is allowed under the Indian Act, or whether you get into other land management systems that are available. How do you look after the environmental concerns? How do you look after the zoning? You know, do you want housing in one specific area, industry in another? Is that going to be part of your overall plan? How do you look after the quality of the houses? What building codes are you going to follow? Who are you going to arrange that with? How do you look after the health and safety parts of the septic and well, water supply? And where do you get the inspection services? Are you going to be building enough houses that you should have your own, or do you contract that out? The idea of issuing tender documents, you know, when you want to purchase a service or goods, how do you do that? Well, you need standard documents in place. You need to be able to negotiate good agreements for your community. Mortgage documents, there are samples available. Samples that have been tested in court. Why today? There's a large and growing market. There's low interest rates today. It's been proven in other areas of the country. It does work. Also, in the studies of communities that are doing this, there's a very low delinquency rate. You know, if you take your time and work with the individual home buyer and decide a reasonable amount that they can afford to buy a house, then it usually works out. The banks and financial institutions, they're ready to lend you whatever money you need. And it is profitable. These are some of the revolving loan funds that are out there and available. Again, these are somewhat outdated. There was a conference last January, I believe it was, in Ottawa, where First Nations that had revolving loan funds were brought together and they talked about revolving loan funds and how they will work. Six Nations has, I understand it's more than 20 million now, that they have taken from their own revenue, their own sources, and loaned out to their community. So with that, they get the benefit of all of that interest and so on and so on. Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte, Tandamaga, Chris Miracle is here, very instrumental in setting up a great program at Tandamaga, great rental regimes, and they have, with this count, 13 million that they're doing. Wendake, Kahnawake, Buchanan, which is out in Alberta, they do this as well. They've set it up with their community. Nipissing, a smaller amount there. Namgis, I'm not sure where that's from. You know, Curve Lake, our loan fund is a little more than $4 million, so that's available to loan out as new mortgages or for renovations as well. Now the other thing and the benefit from this, if you set it up, start making a bit of profit, by all means, any and all profits should stay within housing. And it should be used, could be used to subsidize your social housing needs. Social housing will never go away. It's going to be there. And it's a step towards having control of your own housing. There are different initiatives and incentives available. There are many communities that are ready. We've also got the home team, a new acronym to remember: Housing Opportunity Management or Mentorship Expertise. And CMHC has a number of videos available, about different communities. Okay, the home team. We're a volunteer advisory group. We're set in place and we're there to help individual communities that want to move toward individual home ownership. Just took that picture this morning. As I mentioned, I've been working at this for more than 20 years. Others have as well. So I've been pushing this with my work, making the connection to economic development, trying to promote the opportunities there. So self-appointed chair at this point. So, Michael Rice, Kahnawake, since the 70s, have been moving towards private home ownership. They have accomplished amazing things in Kahnawake. They've set up their own credit union, and they're able to get their mortgages from the credit union. They have excellent systems of rental and home ownership. So he's available to assist. Chris Miracle, sitting over here, he's also an expert from MBQ, working on contract with Ottawa, traveling across the country, looking at housing, looking at the different opportunities there. Jeffrey Toulouse from Wiki, he's been working with us as well. Wayne Stotts from Six Nations, an expert on financial management, how to set up policies for your housing. Grace Martineau, I'm sure you'll see Grace around at the conference as well. She works with the Ontario First Nation Tech Services Corps as a housing advisor. Earl Commanda, the First Nation Market Housing Fund. And he'll be presenting on what the fund is about and how it can act as a backstop and help your community in accessing mortgage money as well. Diane Lavola, an officer with Aboriginal Affairs, an expert on land issues. Chris Miracle, or Chris Hamden, he is the manager of what we know as ABC, the Aboriginal Business Development, ABDP. When you go to set up private businesses, their programming is there and able to provide grants as well, or loans. Lisa Alphonse works with the Ministry of Aboriginal Affairs, and she sits with us on the advisory team, and she's our connection to the province. Jerry Huebner, an expert on partnerships, how to access funding, finance. Catherine Campbell is here as well from CMHC. She's been extremely supportive with the work we've been doing over the last couple of years. We've also engaged Xerox Business Center as the coordinators. They have helped us set up the website. They helped to coordinate some of the gatherings we've had. The commitment from the home team to help advance HAB, Housing as a Business, help guide the plans that individual communities want to do, make recommendations if they're requested, foster communication among First Nations, and again, evaluate, monitor, and make recommendations. We've been meeting once, twice a year. When we get together, we talk about some of the happenings. We look at policies that are coming out. We see if there's ways that we can influence policies, so we do a bit of that. We've put together a few templates and tools that are available on the website. If we have time, I will show access to that website. We've had 2 seminars to date. That's where we've invited 15 or 20 First Nations to participate. And when we do the seminar, it's 2.5 days of information such as I'm providing here, but then we get into detailed presentations from individual communities, individual government departments, and so on. So it's over a 2.5 day period. We've had 2 of them to date. This was from the first one back March of last year. We invited 2 individuals from each community, ECDEV and Housing. Longinong, down the southwest, they participated. Batchewana, Fort William, right next door here. Cheegeen, Moose Cree up in the north. Nipissing, I mentioned. Oneida participated. Rama, Saginaw. Wiki, New Credit, Pikwakanagan, and Whitefish. Can't pronounce that one. The second one was just this past October. We invited some of the same communities and a few new ones as well, but we asked that different participants attend. We also had NAN attend this session and a few other observers as well. So Longinong again, Alderville, Immune Group, Chippewa Thames, Constance Lake. Big River, very interested, very progressive community with their housing. Gooching, Tamagami as well. And these are small communities, large communities. Whitefish River, Wakanaka, Whitefish Lake. So we tried to get a number of communities that had the desire and potential to move toward housing as a business. small communities, large communities, some that were practicing parts of it, some that were brand new to the idea. The goals we had were, let's start thinking about the economic development area of housing. Let's start thinking about keeping a lot of that money within our community, creating work, creating employment, creating training. We brought in a number of First Nations that are practicing housing as a business. We brought in the group from Alberta. They demonstrated how they were able to incorporate their culture into what they were doing. And they set up a great system that's working with it. The 10 recommendations out of these 2 seminars: continue with the experts on home team, continue adding to that team of expertise. The website, hopefully I can get that website running and just give you a quick run through that as well. Keep that updated. Have a follow-up workshop. All of this, of course, will be subject to ongoing support. Develop pad position papers. Put more information about lands on the website. We need to involve the national groups as well. We need to expand. Have a look at this across the country. I know we've been invited to speak out in Saskatchewan toward the end of this month, and we're looking at doing this as well. So sharing information, sharing expertise, and working together. We need to get the word out, and how do we do that? How are we going to do that? We need to look at the money elements of things. Finding a housing host for HAB, HHH. This initiative will work best if it's driven by an Aboriginal organization. So that's what we're looking at now. We're looking at the different housing associations, but we've looked very closely with, started initial discussions as well with the Ontario First Nation Tech Services Board. So we're hoping that they can assume the leadership with this initiative. That's yet to be determined. And we need to continue working on the home team. I was talking with a few of the communities recently. I was talking with Pick River this morning. They've just been approved for the CEOP, the funding that I talked about in the 4 phases. They've been approved for that funding, so they're moving forward to look at this in a more comprehensive way, I guess. And, so that's great to see. There are some of the other communities moving forward with this. It's going to be around forever. We're going to need houses for eternity, and it keeps evolving. What are some of the benefits that can be realized? I talked about the gainfully employed, and that's what I'm mentioning here. It's an unserviced market. There's people that have good incomes that want to come home, want to build houses. We need to look at that. There's an opportunity to build more houses. You have the opportunity, when you realize profits, to help your, the more needy, help with the social housing. Step towards having more control. There are and will continue to be government housing initiatives and incentives. The demand out there is just huge, and the government, they continue to come up with different programs and incentives, and you need to take advantage of those. If you move into HAB, then you have the advantage of controlling the interest rate, offering a fair interest rate to your community members. And it's a proven good business. You know, you see houses sprouting up all over the place. I know Thunder Bay is building 200-300 houses a year. That's good business. I mentioned the loan delinquency is pretty low where this is being operated. You're able to set up your own standards for the housing. And you're investing into your own community membership. There's opportunities for training, opportunities for employment, opportunities to keep the money within your own community. You got it. Thank you. How are we doing for time? Did you want to have a quick look at the website or questions?
Just looking at your presentation there, I know for us in the north, we face a problem when it comes to time for getting funding. And we only have a kind of like a door opening for April to September, October, things start to change for us. And I'm wondering if there's ways that we can look at better for funding, that we look at beginning of April or something that we can jump on board where everybody that in the north here can, you know, have a start date in April or May where instead of working in June, July, and you're running into cold, because the majority of our, when we built houses, we had to let people off because of the weather. Because it's too cold.
Yeah, there's a video that touches on that. I think it's available on CMHC, and it looks at multi-year. So when you're looking at the seasons, and I'll just be a little bit silly with this, but so in the winter time, the idea would be to cut your logs, get your timber ready, and then do the lumber. In the summertime, that would be the time to frame the houses, get them set up on the ground, get them in place. You might be doing 8 or 10 at a time. And when the winter comes, that's the time you would be working to finish off the inside and getting the services in place, getting the houses finished off. But I guess what I'm saying is you need to set it up in a cycle situation that will work for your community. And it's not simply a 1 year. You need to go beyond that. You need to start looking at the plan now, start looking at a 3, 4, 5-year plan, get that in place, figure out what you have to do in the first year, figure out where you can access the money, figure out what you need to put in place, and move it in a phased approach. Yeah, it's not going to work. You know, if you decide right now you want to have 10 houses in July, it just won't work. And then there's a training part of things too. You need carpenters, plumbers, electricians. It's a long term. You know, Curve Lake have been at this for 40 years, and we still need to improve, find new ways.
Well, with us,
That's very true, and I try to make those points in this presentation as subtly as I can. But absolutely, a business operation is different from the government of chief and council. It has to be separate, and that's one of the first things that you have to do. Work with your community, work with your chief and council, lay out all the options, lay out the situation, then set a plan in place. Decide then and there, and you need agreement mandate from the chief and council. If you're going to operate this separate from chief and council, you need that agreed to ahead of time. And that is the only way to work, because it's difficult to chief and council. They are extremely busy, and business has to operate separately. And that's the importance of setting up the business separate and having it as well. Well, the thing is, set up a different board of directors to operate the company. And that board of directors would not change with your chief and council. The technical part of that, it would work best if it's a for-profit operation, but the profit would be set up to stay within the housing. And of course, I'd like to retire soon. But yeah, and exactly, it's going to be different for individual communities, but absolutely, the thing to do is work internally, decide what you want to do, and then approach the home team to work with you.
On behalf of the organizing committee, I'd just like to present this small token. Appreciate you for your time and your efforts. Great presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, the last thing, if you could please take a minute or two and fill out the presentation survey. Your comments, reviews are what make this conference better and better every year. And we do take and note most of the changes that you supply to us.
As you're doing that, what I'm going to do is hook on to the website, www.haab.ca. I'll just hook onto it, show you some of the highlights of it. Not going to go into any detail, but by all means, visit that website. There's a great deal of information there available to help you.